Lots going on with NATO. They're doing this big air show. They're trying to argue that they've got all of this unity and stuff like that. But behind the scenes, there seem to be some cracks, some fissures going on. Your thoughts on what's happening with NATO? And I know there's plenty, Scott Ritter.
Excuse me. We'll just start with air defender since you brought that up. That's the big NATO air exercise. I guess, it's interesting when you read around Telegram and on Twitter, even though I'm not a member of Twitter anymore, my wife actually lets me scroll through her Twitter so I can read what people are saying. I am continue to be somewhat angered at Elon Musk for keeping me off that platform, for not doing a darn thing wrong. It is what it is. People are like, NATO is going to use air defender as a cover for projecting NATO air power into Ukraine in support of the counteroffensive. And that's part and parcel of the notion that NATO is somehow this all-powerful entity that, can simply it's like Thanos in Avengers, snap your fingers and make 50% of the universe disappear. I think what we're seeing is the reality is that this is not what it is. The burning Leopard tanks, the burning Bradleys, the destroyed M777s, the destroyed Caesar platforms, etc., shows that NATO equipment is destroyed every bit as easy as any equipment. That war is a bloody business, and as General Cavoli, the commander of the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, has said, NATO is incapable of imagining the level of violence that's taking place on the ground in Europe. Neither is it capable of imagining the level of violence that would take place in the air over Ukraine should NATO want to get involved in this. Air defender looks good on paper, but as somebody who's done exercises like this before, participated in, has been monitoring them and their goals and objectives, I'm struck by a couple of things. One, by surging aircraft into German airspace and airfields, this is a huge logistical undertaking. And I'm curious about how much advanced preparation had to be done to make this happen. For instance, if you're going to take an F-35 squadron that isn't normally stationed in Europe and deploy it to Europe, how far in advance did you have to start pre-stocking the spare parts and the unique support aspects of this aircraft? Because you can't be expeditionary if prior to your expedition you had to spend 6 months getting ready for the exercise. So that's the one thing, is that this is sort of an artificiality. This is an exercise that has been a long time in the planning. This is not a true exercise of expeditionary or warfighting capability. This is an exercise in making things move, positioning things, and then getting them to learn how to operate on the base, getting them to talk to one another. This isn't war. It's not even close to war. Two, a lot of the aircraft sent in were the F-35s. So I'd be interested in learning about what the maintenance to operation ratio is of the F-35. When you deployed all these F-35s from their home base to Germany, how many of them retained operational status upon landing or had to be pulled aside to have things happen to get them back up to speed? What is the impact? How much tempo are the F-35s going to be put in? Are they going to be put into a warlike tempo where they're constantly put in the air? And if so, I'd like to know what their stress rate is. But the point is they won't be tested like that because we can't afford to test them like that. Because if we did test them like that, all the squadrons would be non-operational afterwards, which is the reality if the F-35 ever does go to war against a peer-level opponent like Russia that is going to stress them 24/7. The F-35 is an unsustainable combat platform, and Air Defender proves it by not exercising it. Questions such as how much fuel does all this take? And, where did it all come from? Did you have to build up fuel stocks to do this? And once you burn through the fuel, do you have sufficient fuel in the end to, for instance, go to war? Are you going to run out of aviation fuel halfway through because you haven't been preparing for this kind of war? You don't have massive stockpiles of this. Your peacetime military operates on a budget, which means like anybody who operates on a budget, You only buy the gas you need. You don't go around, especially when gas prices are high, buying a whole bunch of gas just to keep it sitting there. So you buy sufficient gas to keep the plane sorting, but you're not ready for war because that means you have to go full time and you will run out of gas. The other thing you're going to run out of is bombs. How many bombs does NATO have in its inventory right now? You know, the Air Force, it drops bombs on targets. How many bombs do they have? Remember, General Cavoli, the scope and scale of the violence is beyond imagination. That means NATO hasn't been imagining this. They haven't been imagining this. So where are the bombs? They don't exist. How about air-to-air missiles? You know, back in the 1980s, when NATO was preparing for a conflict with the Soviet Union, one of the big secrets of it was we would run out of air-to-air missiles within the first week of a war because we just didn't have enough. And guess what? It's even worse today. If we got into a high rate of operation conflict with Russia, we would run out of air-to-air missiles. We would run out of aircraft. We would run out of everything because we're not ready for this. And that's what Air Defender proves. The reality is when you take a look at the Air Defender exercise, when it's all said and done, it's going to show that NATO is not ready for a major conflict with Russia. And there's no way that NATO could do this. The other thing that will be unspoken about this is that there's no air defense for Air Defender. And so all of the muscle flexing that they're doing right now is done in a peacetime environment with no enemy bombing the living dog poop out of them. Again, back in the day, I just remember the exercises that take place where I lived in Germany, Simbach Airfield. They would come in and they would actually put a sortie of around 40 aircraft attacking the airfield, and then they would damage the airfield like it would be in war. And then you had to come in and actually repair the airfield and do that and get the airplanes flying instantly, because that's what war is. War is about getting the crap blown out of your airfield and turning it around and having planes continue to sortie because you need to keep that going. How many airfields are going to be blown up in Germany this time around? What's their airfield repair capability? Because they're going to need it because they don't have any air defense. None whatsoever. And what they do have doesn't work. How do we know that? Just ask the Patriot battery people operating in Ukraine today, or the Iris-T people, or the NASAMS people. It is that. So Air Defender is an absolute joke. And it just exposes the frailty of NATO. Now, that's not a bad thing to do if you have the ability to move forward and act on that. But they talk about NATO unity, and we've talked about that. There's a couple things. Sweden and Finland were invited to join NATO last May in Madrid, formal invitation. And Finland actually joined in April of this year. They got it. But Turkey has put the kibosh on the Swedish membership, citing what it says is the incompatibility of Sweden's embrace of Kurdish separatists that the Kurds, who are going to be their allies, say are terrorists. And the Turks are saying, we can't allow you into an alliance when you support people that we view as the enemy, existential enemy. In Sweden, they tried in June 1st, they passed certain laws to try and enable prosecution. Indeed, they are putting charges against a Kurd who is sought to embezzle funds to support the Kurdish separatists. And there is talk about the deportation of a non-Swedish citizen Kurd to Turkey on charges of terrorism. That's not enough. Erdogan said you have to do so much more, and Sweden's incapable of it. And Erdogan, I think just this morning, said there ain't going to be Swedish membership in NATO anytime soon. So that's a downer for NATO, for this great show of unity. The United States just sanctioned Hungary, a NATO member, by the way, but we've sanctioned them. We're not providing them with missiles because we're unhappy with things that Hungary has done. How's that for unity? And I know last May, Jens Stoltenberg said NATO's got this new strategic vision that includes reaching out to the Pacific. We've talked about this, the NATO outreach to the Pacific. And in earlier this year, Stoltenberg said we're going to be opening up a liaison office in Japan to better enable NATO, coordinate with the Japanese, the Australians, the New Zealand, our partners in the Pacific. And they were getting ready to do that in time for this NATO summit, which, by the way, Japan and South Korea have been invited to attend, except NATO unity. France said no. France, and we knew France was doing this back when Macron visited China earlier this spring. He said that he didn't want Europe to become a vassal of the United States, to be held prisoner to the potential conflict between the United States and China. That they didn't want that. That Europe needed to get its own sovereignty when it comes to its policies. And I think there's a recognition that NATO on its own volition would not go to the Pacific, that it's only happening because the United States is pushing it on them. And France has come out and said that when we speak of NATO, we're speaking of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the charter limits us to the North Atlantic, and the Pacific is not the North Atlantic, and therefore we will not support the opening of a liaison office in Japan because we don't want to be involved in provoking China unnecessarily. So that's another downer for NATO going into this. And then the biggest downer of all will be the counteroffensive, but I'm sure we'll talk about that soon.